Well, good evening and welcome to tonight's lecture, Wokeness in Corporate America, How Wokeness Will Affect Your Future by Kenny Hsu. My name is Dr. Anthony Bradley. I am a professor of religious studies here at the King's College and the director of the Center for the Study of Human Flourishing. I'd like to offer you all a very warm welcome to this event. Your work life will soon begin. Are you prepared for the politically correct corporate world? Corporations are taking drastic steps to show the world that they are not racist. This includes preferential hiring and promotion for minorities and women and woke training sessions that blame white people for society's problems. Joining us this evening is Mr. Kenny Hsu, who will provide insights into how corporate woke policies will affect your future if they are not stopped. Kenny Hsu is the president of the race-blind advocacy group, Color Us United, the author of the book Inconvenient Minority, and the host of the podcast Inconvenient Minority, a podcast that deeply investigates race, identity, and culture. Kenny has spoken and written in several places, for example, in the Wall Street Journal, City Journal, Quillette, Newsweek, the New York Post, the National Review, the Federalist, the Washington Examiner, and the Daily Signal. His journalism is beloved by communities of all races who share his passion for making the United States a more fair and aristocratic society. Kenny has spoken on color blindness and critical race theory in front of groups as diverse as the nationally renowned Pacific Legal Foundation, to the Boston Rally for Education Rights, to the all-Black Connecticut Parents Union. His commentary has propelled him into interviews with Fox News, Newsweek, the Epoch Times, and various YouTube shows, radio interviews, and podcasts, and features in the New York Times Magazine and NPR. Will you join me in welcoming to the King's College for our lecture this evening, Mr. Kenny Hsu. So what we'll do is we'll have the lecture, and then we'll open up for Q&A, and then there'll be hospitality after the event is over. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. If you saunter down just a couple blocks down Lower Manhattan, you will encounter 200 Vesey Street. At the foot of this coppice of buildings that you find at 200 Vesey Street, you will encounter the prestigious American Express headquarters, an ice glass castle in the middle of Soho. American Express was one of the greatest companies that this country has ever built. Its leader, Kenneth Chenault, between the years 2005 and 2015, guided this company into $25 billion in sales to become one of the largest and most prestigious and best places to work for in America. In fact, so well did he steer this company that he was named one of the top CEOs in all of America. And Kenneth Chenault happened to be Black. After Kenneth Chenault retired, he appointed or wanted to appoint a successor to the CEO to become CEO of American Express. But unfortunately, that CEO died in a plane crash. So he had to pick a second replacement, a CEO named Steve Squeri, who took the mantle in replacement of Kenneth Chenault. It was going to be nearly impossible for Steve Squeri to replace or replicate the success of one of the greatest CEOs of modern American history. But Steve Squeri had other ideas. You see, he had a bit of a little man syndrome. You know, He wasn't the first picked for the job, and he wanted to do something to make American Express seem better than his leadership could afford. So he decided to make American Express the wokest company in America. He created new policies that promoted minorities and women, not exactly in the way you'd think. He assigned 15% bonuses for hiring managers to promote minorities and women, meaning that if your company, if you're as a manager, hired enough minorities and women, you would get a 15% bonus added to your paycheck. By the way, that also means, by extension, firing white males. He created a leadership program in 2019 that fast-tracked people from the lowest tier of American Express into one of the top tiers of American Express. But he limited entrance into this prestigious leadership program only to Black Americans. Not even Latino or Asian Americans were allowed to apply. Steve Squeri decided that the thing that was going to make American Express the most distinguished company was no longer the strength of his product, but the upfront cosmetic diversity of his team. And in my presentation tonight, I'm going to explain to you just a few of the implications of what policies like this, promoted by organizations like American Express, but also promoted throughout companies across the nation, are doing to our culture and to your life. But who am I? I'm Kenny Hsu. I'm president of Colorists United. I lead this organization to do investigative work and advocacy in service of a race-blind America. I believe that people should be treated on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That means that we should be taking race out of the equation in our lives. I think that America, one of the greatest things about America is that there is no one skin color, no one ethnicity, no one culture that defines who we are as Americans. We just want to get along. We just want to get along with other people. And I get and I respect the fact that we have diversity issues in our country. But I want to create solutions, real solutions, that do not denigrate any member needlessly or promote division just so we can solve these problems. I wrote the book, An Inconvenient Minority. How many of you all have heard of the Harvard admissions case? Wow, a lot of you. Guess that means I did my job. I wrote the book, An Inconvenient Minority, which in 2021, and helped to be a journalist on this issue, furthering Asian Americans in our discourse and showing why Asian Americans are critical to understanding the failures of affirmative action and racial preferences in our country. So if you guys are interested, I'd oblige you to come buy a book. And in fact, the proceeds of the book tonight are going to go to my nonprofit, Colorists United. But let's talk. I wanted to start off this talk by talking about corporations. You didn't come here to talk about Harvard. Of course, you can always ask questions about it. You didn't come here to talk about Harvard. You came here to talk about corporate wokeness. What is a corporation? In the shortest, most cohesive format that I could explain what a corporation is, a corporation simply is an agglomeration of shareholders and employees dedicated to a specific purpose. That's all it is. Formalized into one entity. That's it. If you are a profit-seeking corporation, it's usually to make profit or to provide a product or a value, a service. If you're a nonprofit corporation, you usually have a mission statement. The employees, the stakeholders, the shareholders, all are arriving to the same conclusion. They want to dedicate some part of their life, some part of their investment towards advancing that mission. That's all a corporation is. Corporations formally were conceived of by royal charter. The modern corporation came actually out of Queen Elizabeth's charter to the East India Trading Company to conquer and explore foreign lands so that, the Queen's countrymen could go out and conquer and explore the New World. And if they wanted to do that, they needed to have some assurance that when they came home, that they would be compensated for it. So she drew up a contract that enabled the people who went out and took immense risks, usually their lives, certainly their wives and their children's fortunes, to go out and take immense risks with their lives. That's what corporations are for. They're always created for an exploratory, for a purpose of building something, of creating something, Granted, not all corporations always have noble purposes. We can look at the East India Trading Company for itself. Very mixed results in the world. But ideally, a corporation is supposed to be created so that people can come together in service of a clear objective. Lastly, I wanted to address this idea of limited liability. How many of you have ever heard of the term LLC? How many of you know what it means? Of course. We do have some adults in the room who knows what it means, but limited liability corporation basically means you can't risk more than you put in. Generally speaking, it means you can't risk more than you put in a company. So if you put in $100,000 into Apple, which is an LLC, you can't lose more than $100,000. Now you might think, well, Kenny, how could you ever lose more than $100,000? Well, there's a lot of things you could lose if we didn't have strong LLC laws in our country. For example, let's say these conquerors came back and, things messed up. Their corporation messed up. They did some failure. The Queen could have said, off with your head. They lost a lot more than their money at that point. Or off with your family's head. So an LLC ensures that people, whatever they put in, that's the most that they could lose. And you wonder, Kenny, why is this important? I'll explain it to you later. I just want you guys to know this right now. Corporations in the American system. So we had a period in our country of corporate management and labor strife. Okay, there was conflict between management and workers. It led to the creation of labor unions because managers in corporations started to but really do the equivalent of forcing employees to do things that they didn't really want to do in their private life. Corporations, for example, would ask their workers to vote for a certain candidate, vote a certain way, do a certain thing. They would ask them to give a certain percentage of their proceeds towards something that the manager wanted. And these issues combined with things like wage issues, they would ask employees to work longer hours than they really wanted to work. Those issues led to the establishment of unions, led to a period of strife in our country. And what emerged out of that strife was a consensus, a consensus. And the consensus that we've operated on for basically the past 40 years of corporations, that is now only recently being challenged, is the consensus that corporations should only ask employees to do what is reasonable to the extent of what a corporate purpose is. So no, basically, if you're a corporate manager, don't try to tell me how to vote. Don't try to tell me what to believe. Don't try to tell me what to say. Just pay me a fair wage. Treat me based on what I can contribute to your team. That's the consensus. It's a fragile consensus, but it's a consensus nonetheless. And for a while, this worked. There's been a mutual understanding in our country that corporations don't interfere in the personal or private lives of their employees or interfere in their freedoms. It makes life more enjoyable and freer for everyone involved. And it's worked out. But enter the new corporation. In response to social trends in our country, much of what I can get into, a new corporation, a new type of corporate governance is currently being established in our country, called the Social Justice Corporation. The Social Justice Corporation blends activism into its profit-seeking mission. So you're a corporation now, but your CEO is now not just the arbiter of your financial salary or, your work life, but now this CEO is part CEO, part profit. Profit, P-R-O-P-H-E-T. Part person that is supposed to guide you into behaving the right moral way that he wants you to behave. The Social Justice Corporation is very interesting because, you would think that the consensus worked, but because of our universities and because of the way that we have been tantalizing our young people and students, there has been increased demand for the companies that they work for people to work for, to adhere to the values that the students coming out of college want them to adhere to. And this has actually taken progressively more social justice oriented natures until we've arrived at the modern Social Justice Corporation. But here's the one thing that you should know. The one thing you should know about a social justice corporation, regardless of whether you are initially inclined to agree with it or not, is that it gives management more power over you. Okay? Because now, under the modern Social Justice Corporation, management can force employees to attend the trainings they want to attend. They can force employees to give part of their salaries to social justice. They can even force employees to put up with their own discrimination, as evidenced by my first story, American Express. We're going to get to that. The modern Social Justice Corporation has the modern social justice profits. How many of y'all have heard of BlackRock? BlackRock, the world's largest hedge fund, right? You might think cold, calculating, designed on making money. But now BlackRock's CEO, Larry Fink, wants to save the world along with making money. Look at this Wall Street Journal article. Larry Fink wants to save the world, parentheses, and make money doing it. Well, it's pretty hard to do both. I wish Larry Fink would choose what he wants to do, because if you try to blend those two things, things get out of hand really fast. Larry Fink is the new kind of CEO. Along with people like Larry Fink, there are other examples. WeWork CEO Adam Newman. In some ways, even Apple CEO Steve Jobs kind of started this trend of part corporate figure, part moneymaker, part zealot, part activist. But Larry Fink's idea is solving climate change. He wants to use BlackRock to solve climate change by only investing, and just to make this very simple, by only investing in funds that are so-called sustainable. Environmentally sustainable. Now, corporations can use a variety of accounting tricks to make them seem carbon neutral when they're not actually carbon neutral, but we don't have to get into that. The point is, Larry Fink wants to use his employees' money, his employees' resources, your investors' resources, anything you put in BlackRock to advance his morality, his way of viewing the world. And the modern Social Justice Corporation allows him to do that. I'm going to give you guys 4 problems with social justice corporations today, because I do think that this is wrong. I think that the new trend of the corporations involved in public life is wrong. And I'm just going to go through these, and I want to entertain your questions on this. I want to entertain your challenges. You guys are smart students. We should be able to interrogate this issue objectively. But Problem number one, most of the time, the corporation's policies, especially on things like racial justice, don't help the minorities they serve. Number two, social justice corporations eliminate the principle of meritocracy. Very important principle. I want to explain this to you. Number three, social justice corporations are anti-competitive. Social justice ideology privileges big corporations over small corporations. Number four, social justice corporations cover for real corporate exploitation. I'll go through these slides. Let's start with number one. Most of the time, social justice corporations do not help the minorities they serve, they claim to serve. So I want to talk about a specific corporation, Bank of America. Bank of America just created this new housing proposal. Actually, this just happened a month ago. You can look it up online. It's on CBS News. They're going to offer 0 down payments and 0 closing costs for Black and Hispanic families in certain Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. 0 down payments, 0 closing costs. And the reason is social justice. The reason is, well, Black people, Black Americans don't own homes at the rate that white Americans do, and it's a way to build wealth, et cetera, et cetera. Fine, I get the idea, but this is actually a really bad policy for Black and Hispanic Americans because there's a reason why they choose to rent more. There's a reason why we have down payments. And the reason why is because you want to ensure that you're credit worthy, that you can pay off your mortgage. And if you can't, things get really bad for you really quickly. And so what Bank of America is doing is that they're incentivizing Black and Hispanic families to take on more debt. More debt. There's a reason why the Bible says that thou shalt not chain yourself to debt. It's not an actual verse. But debt, personal debt and immense personal debt tends to backfire on you eventually. And do you really want big banks owning so much of the debt of Black and Hispanic Americans? If you guys remember, part of the reason why the 2008 financial crisis occurred was because we created very lax mortgage standards, especially for new immigrant families, so that they could buy homes. And that didn't turn out well. But you know who really benefits from these policies? Oh, the banks. Bank of America really benefits because banks love debt. So, as usual, a social justice policy on face, social justice, in reality, not helpful. I want to go into this example. This is kind of funny. So in Georgia this year, Georgia Republicans passed a voter ID law, basically said you need a driver's license or some form of ID to vote. Major League Baseball, for some reason, got really mad about this. And they decided that they were going to pull their All-Star game from Atlanta in order to protest the Georgia Republicans' voter ID bill. Well, Atlanta is a 49.79% Black city. It's actually one of the most Black cities in our country. So what Major League Baseball really decided to do was they decided to pull, an All-Star game, which generates millions of dollars of revenue that will help thousands of Black families. They decided to pull that game in the name of helping Black Americans. I would say I'm surprised, but after all, they are the MLB, they're the opposite of BLM. So, the principle of meritocracy. What is the principle of meritocracy? So the principle of meritocracy basically says, I don't care about your background. I don't care about where you're coming from. I'm just going to treat you on the things that are relevant. I'm just going to treat you on the things that are relevant to your function in a company, right? Meritocracy is actually a result of the consensus that we created as Americans basically saying corporations don't interfere, don't look at my personal life. I'm going to work for you, but protect my personal freedoms. That's what meritocracy is, and it's worked. It has helped America become the country that it is today. It's helped us absorb many immigrants, actually, because we pledged that we're not going to care about whatever color you're coming from or whatever background you're coming from. We're just going to treat you based on your hard work. It's what has allowed people from so many different cultures to build teams together and to work hard together because they know fundamentally they'll be treated only on the things that they contribute. It's a beautiful American principle, and it's being threatened by the social justice corporation. Let's take a look at the statistic. United Airlines has opened a new flight school and a new hiring push plans to increase diversity specifically for BIPOC. BIPOC means Black, Indigenous people of color. Who does that exclude? Oh, it excludes Asian Americans. A little bit of a snip here, but plans to increase flight school. They want 50% of their new pilots to be BIPOC or women, basically. This is a well and good idea, but there is a reason. Well, not this one. Yeah, actually, let's go to this one. There's a reason why 95% of pilots in our country are men, even though we've had flight schools open for women since 1910. We've had women pilots, we've had female pilots, we've had many qualified, very good female pilots. But you have to understand, I'm a writer. I work in an industry that's 75% female. Should I be begging for more male writers in my industry? People make different decisions with their lives. If you want to be a pilot, you have to pass a standard battery of spatial recognition tests. If you're a male, on average, I'm just speaking in averages, people are outliers, anybody can be an outlier, but on average, men perform better on spatial recognition tests than women. Different interests, different desires, different personalities. Meaning that if a company like United Airlines wanted to open a flight school and make it open and really have a goal for 50% of their pilots to be women, then they would have to, at least to some extent, compromise not they would have to, but I would say it's likely that they would compromise the principle of hiring the most qualified candidate, period. And in a profession like aviation, the consequences of not being the most qualified, just like being a doctor, just like being in the military, it's pretty severe. So that's what I mean by compromising the principle of meritocracy. The thing is, here's a consequence of meritocracy. Consequence of meritocracy is inequity. There's bound to be inequity because people in different cultures are going to choose different things. Asian Americans tend to study really hard for tests, and they tend to be really academically gifted in our country, meaning that if we just admitted people on the basis of merit, Asian Americans are going to make a disproportionate number to Harvard. But Harvard can't tolerate that. They don't want too many Asian Americans. So they discriminate against Asian Americans because they don't want 43% of their student body to be Asian American. Another thing about social justice corporations, they're anti-competitive. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. How many of y'all have heard of diversity, equity, and inclusion? DEI or some of those terms. Okay. 3-letter words, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sounds really nice. Again, all of these things sound really nice. The costs of diversity, equity, and inclusion are expensive. The chief diversity officer of Google makes $200,000 a year, I'm not sure the average mom and pop shop could be able to afford that. There's a new craze to invest in, like I told you about Larry Fink, responsible and sustainable funds. The management fees for responsible, sustainable funds are twice as high as the average management fee for a typical fund. And you know what corporations do with that? They pass that down right onto the employee and right onto the consumer. So guess what? You want to invest in responsible and sustainable funds, at least whatever is the accounting measurement of that? Well, it's going to cost you. And I'll tell you what, if you're a small business, it's going to cost you a whole lot more than if you're a big business, because when you're Google and when you've basically made a cash machine in the early 2000s, yeah, you can survive DEI. But if you're a small business, less likely. This is just an article about sustainable funds. The last thing I want to talk about, the last problem I want to talk about social justice corporations, one that's personal to my heart. Because you come to this college for a reason, right? People have invested in you. People have trained you. People have educated you so that you can be principled people going out into the world. And one of the most fundamental principles that you will realize going out into the real world is that just because someone says something doesn't mean they're going to do it. Just because someone says something doesn't mean the intention is there. Okay? People say things all the time about inclusion and diversity. But sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they're doing it as a cover. American Express has a 15% bonus for hiring minorities and women and for firing white males. In 2021, American Express got rid of 2/3 of their sales team, their global sales team. Their global sales team was 98% white males. They got rid of 2/3 of that sales team, 2/3 of the top 50 performers, the people in the most profitable division generating billions of dollars of revenue for them. They got rid of their top 50 performers. And they used diversity as a cover for a truly horrendous policy. Meanwhile, their executives got raises and a promotion. Their vice president. American Express is currently actually under investigation by the IRS for tax fraud. They are being investigated by the IRS for misleading products, for misleading their customers into thinking that they could get a tax break when they can't. It's a bit of a complex thing, but that's the essence. And American Express's solution was to fire the lower guys. Not the guys, not the VPs, not the executives, not the leaders, not the ones who should be taking responsibility for all this, but the lower guys. The guys who were corn-fed, raised to sell. They're real victims of wokeness in corporations. And sometimes, if a company is so uber aggressive on diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're concealing something. This is Nick Williams. Nick Williams was the #1 performer at American Express 3 out of the past 8 years. That means that he generated the most revenue for American Express out of any salesman in the entire country for 3 out of the past 8 years. And he lives in Iowa, of all places. He's the kind of man that American Express fired. And you know what? You know what precipitated these events? Nick Williams there was a client who happened to be a Black woman who asked him for a large line of credit. Now, this woman did not meet the minimum credit standards. So after a round back and forth, a row between the two, Nick Williams denied him the line of credit. She complained to his manager. That's a line. She complained to his manager about racial discrimination. His manager came, did 73-day long investigation of Nick Williams' behavior. In this investigation, Nick Williams was not allowed an outside counsel. He was not allowed to defend himself. He was not allowed to get a lawyer to defend himself. As the lawyers of American Express piled on him, more than a dozen lawyers piled upon him, accusing him of this, accusing him of that, After 73 days, he got fired by a phone call. Lost his job, the job that he bled blue for. There are real consequences to these policies. Wokeness facilitates a divisive and hostile culture, because when you start looking at people not by how they perform, when you start looking at people not based on the content of their character, but by the color of their skin, that's all they are to you. Nick Williams was the top performer at American Express, but to Amex's lawyers and diversity bureaucrats, he was just another white man. This is an article that Nick Williams came out with us, with Color Us United, after he came to us, Color Us United, because there was no other place to turn. But this brings me back to limited liability. Interesting. This brings me back to limited liability. What does limited liability mean? Limited liability means you can only lose what you put in. We have laws about this. We have traditions about this. It's a good tradition. Nick Williams lost a lot more than what he put in. He lost a lot more. Because after he refused to sign his severance agreement, telling him, shut up, don't talk about this, he refused to sign it. You know what they did? They put him on a blacklist for credit cards. Now, Nick Williams is no longer allowed to use a credit card, any credit card, not just American Express. That's liability. That's how bad companies could be under the new social justice corporation. Watch out. You might think these are good ideas. In theory, maybe they are. It sounds good, but beware. Because what it really does, if you concede the social justice corporation, you're conceding power over you and your freedoms like you've never conceded before, at least since 1950. It's not your company's job to tell you what to think. When they do it, they usually mess it up. What is your company's job? It's to pay you for your efforts, meritocracy, not treat you in a hostile manner, facilitate a good culture that can occasionally inspire you to become a team in service of the goal, to explore, to build, to do something. But it's not to tell you what to think. It's not to attack you for your race. It's not to exercise this level of power over you that has possibly never been exercised in you since the early 20th century. That's for sure. But I get it. Look, there are real questions about diversity and inclusion in this country. I get it. And this is why you're here. This is why you're here at the King's College, a Christian university, to set you with principles, to live as principled beings, principled and productive workers in society. And there are real questions, and here are some questions you should be asking yourself, because there are real issues about inclusion and diversity in our country. And I'm not asking these questions as rhetorical questions. These are genuine questions. Number one, should the military lower standards for women and transgenders? You could replace that with any any ethnic minority, any minority in our country? Should you lower standards? You know, if you want inclusion, you want diversity, are you willing to sacrifice qualifications for that? And if so, what kind of sacrifice are you willing to make? What kind of boundaries are you willing to draw? Number two, is it a corporation's place to fix social problems? Should people like Larry Fink, who are, again, blended CEOs and activists, should they be allowed to do what they want? Or should you put up with a company that does something like that? It's another question, it's a separate question, but it's related. Number three, is it okay to discriminate against the privileged group for the sake of diversity? Of course, I'm using the word privileged kind of tongue in cheek. But let's say you buy that white people and Asians are privileged in this country. Hopefully my book will help you to consider otherwise. But let's say you buy it. Is it okay to discriminate against the privileged group for the sake of diversity? You know, is it just? Is it moral? Is it questions of justice? I know what I know. And I know what Galatians 3:23 says. It says there's neither Jew nor Gentile, nor male nor female, nor slave nor free, but all are one in Christ Jesus. I think to me, that's a colorblind framework. That means that we should not harbor prejudice. In fact, the book of James says that as well. We should not harbor prejudice. And what I see is the reinvention of prejudice, couched under diversity and inclusion. And I'm not just speaking out of my mouth here, I'm speaking out of example, I'm speaking out of the real world. But you have to decide that for yourself. Be a principled leader. The world has invested, donors, principled people have invested in you. The age of 20, 21 years old. Because they truly believe that you can make a difference. Truly. Look, if it's not you, sure ain't going to be them. They're old. They're gone. They're going. It's your world. It's your world. Every principle has to be reborn generation after generation. And those principles are being contested. The principle of non-discrimination, the principle of meritocracy, the principle of fairness, and the principle of tolerance, actually, are being contested by the new social justice corporation and other such movements made in the name of diversity and inclusion. But you have an opportunity to stand against it. You actually have the freedom to make your voice known. And thank God you have the freedom. Because people all over the world, not everybody does. I can tell you what it's like in China right now. I can tell you a little bit. I'm not going to tell you everything. I'm not a China scholar, but I can tell you what's happening. They're building a surveillance state. This surveillance state applies a theory of social credit. And under a social credit state, if you behave in a way the government doesn't want you to behave, you might get docked on your social credit score. If you speak out against the government, you might get docked in your social credit score. They're creating a new social credit system in China, and it could very well happen here. Unless you stand up. And your peers will respect you for it. I'm not saying don't work for any company, although I don't think you should. I'm not sure about American Express, but wherever you go, you have the opportunity to be a leader. And your peers will respect you for it because they understand where you're coming from. And if they don't, you're not surrounding yourself with the right peers. Look, you're extremely young. You're not married. You don't have kids. Nick Williams does. He has 3 children. American Express was his income. It was his life. And he still stood up. And yeah, it hurt him. But he's making a big difference right now at American Express, and we're here to support him. But you don't. You have an opportunity to make your principles known in the world. And I urge you to take that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll open it up for a time of Q&A, question and response. And we will start with me because I'm the moderator. So I do have a question to open it up, and I'll just raise your hand. And if you'd like to ask a question, how would you respond to this objection that I often hear? Well, white men have been in control for so long. No harm, no foul if we just flip it and allow minorities to sort of finally take their place. It's sort of a form of reparations or justice to allow that level of discrimination because whites have been in control so long, and they were in control under conditions like slavery and Jim Crow. So there is an argument that sort of it's our turn now to lead and to allow sort of white males particularly to step back.
So I understand that some of you have, I'm sure all of you have come with completely good intentions and just want to listen. I've also heard that there's potentially extra credit being offered, which of course does not belie your intention to come here. Thank you. It's still 6 o'clock. It's still New York City. You could be doing anything, but you choose to come here, and I'm very appreciative and grateful of that. Look, white males have been in control of society for so long. They've been in control of our institutions. They've been in control of academics. Clearly, they've built such an inbuilt advantage that we need to correct it for that. So I offer, let's do double extra credit for black students here. Oh, and if you are a member of the LGBT community, we'll do triple extra credit. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you guys feel about that? Because that's basically what we're saying here. We're basically saying that we want to either lower standards or pursue affirmative policy. And I'm not exaggerating here. Pursue affirmative policy specifically because of your background. Look, of course, America is disproportionately affected by so-called white males. Of course, we're 60% white country. And of course, because of that, white people probably committed the disproportionate number of historical sins in America. But if we want to go that route, then we're also need to say, well, white people have historically committed a disproportionate number of good things in this country too. And then as soon as you start to go that route, then you start saying things like a white man made the light bulb, and a white man ended the Civil War, and a white man, became the first pilot, flew off Kitty Hawk in North Carolina. And then when you start to go that route, then you start to affirm tenets of white supremacy. Implicitly, you really want to give white people that much agency, that much power over your discourse where everything becomes about white people? Like, stand up for yourself, man. Stand up for yourself as the individual. And the solution, the harmonious solution, is let's not make it about race, because it's not about race. Because ultimately your race is no factor, plays no role, either good nor bad, in your role in history and society. It's still up to you. No, it wasn't a white man that flew off the coast of Kitty Hawk. It was the Wright brothers. Let's put responsibility back to where it belongs, and that's the individual. That's my solution.
Questions, comments? Yes, in the back.
I'm kind of thinking through this as I'm talking, but it seems like you're kind of stressing this idea of we need to go back to a neutral order where we're pursuing profits, not social justice ideology. But I think that might be too weak. Like, why not pursue, another ideology, something that's more befitting a common good? So, for instance, I'm going to be a dentist. I graduated this year. I want to start my own business.
Mm-hmm.
I can't see myself divorcing, what I believe from my company I'm going to create. Like, of course, I'm going to try to do good through my company. I feel like what you're saying doesn't resemble reality. Like, there's no reality where we're just going to be some neutral arbiter. I don't even know if it seems weak, too. It's wrong. The reason why it's not good to do what they did with this guy where they took away his credit is because that's wrong. It's not because they were having one ideology, it's because they had the wrong ideology. What do you make of those criticisms?
Okay, well, it was wrong to take away his credit because the role of a corporation should not extend beyond the risk that you've already put into the corporation. So the reason why it's wrong is because American Express is now interfering with this guy's life way beyond American Express. Now he can't have a Visa, he can't have a MasterCard. His life was severely hurt by American Express. If American Express wanted to terminate him, fine. Fine. You're the manager, you have a right to terminate your employees, okay. But that's the extent of your risk, right? You shouldn't go further than that. You shouldn't deny his credit cards. You shouldn't, target his own personal life. Then you're a very short ways from the Queen saying off with your head. And by the way, off with your kids' heads too. So, but I wanted to touch on another thing you said. You're going to be a dentist. That's awesome. So I've talked with dentists, wannabe dentists, wannabe doctors. And I remember talking with this one woman who is basically my age going into medical school. And she starts coming to me with, well, we need to start to really take care of the social justice causes, Black, BIPOC individuals, everything like that. And, I need to use my career for that ends. And I say, fine. That's totally up to you. You can do what you want with your money. You can contribute to whatever nonprofit you want to contribute. But let me ask you this, Sarah. Maybe your name is Sarah. Let me ask you this. I didn't say this so snarkily, I promise. Let me ask you this. Under your framework of social justice, where we need to contribute proactively to, patients who belong to a certain identity category, are you willing to lower your going rate for oppressed groups? And she said, oh, no, that's not what I mean. I said, but that is what you mean. Because otherwise, the best thing that we can do, and this goes back to what I said, put your money where your mouth is, young lady. Put your money where your mouth is. You believe in these things because that seems to me the most obvious thing that you can do to ensure the part you play in this social justice narrative that you want to create for yourself, and more importantly, that you want to impose upon other people. Because she was advocating that the entire medical profession adopt certain diversity standards and inclusion standards, and even to compromise meritocracy for that. And I said, if you really believe in that, you should do that yourself. But she wasn't willing to do that because she said, I have a career. I gotta save up, I said, well, that's your choice. Don't tell me what to do with my life and how I choose to spend my money.
Do you believe that the cultural meaning or definition of racism and diversity has changed at all through generations or time? And if so, do you think any of these potential changes have had positive or negative consequences?
Yeah, I think that the definition of racism has changed over time. It's changed in the past 5 years, actually. It used to be that to be racist means that you exhibited prejudice beyond what is deserved, basically. For example, if I had a black candidate and a white candidate, the black candidate was clearly more qualified than the white candidate, but then I say something like, I don't want to hire black people, then that's a racist behavior, because the black person deserved to get hired, but because of my prejudice, I use that against him. That's what racism has meant for the better part of society. But that's what we mean when we say America and certain Jim Crow laws were actually racist to black people, because the idea was you artificially raise the standard for black people to vote beyond the standard that is commonly agreed upon for everyone else, right? Like if you wanted to vote in Jim Crow society, if you were white, all you had to be was 18 or 21 or something like that, and be a citizen. But if you were a black person, you needed to conduct a series of tests, you needed to do things designed basically to suppress your ability to vote. So that's racist, because you should be held to the same standard as everyone else. But now we have a new definition of racism that has creeped up through our discourse, facilitated by critical race theory, that basically says racism, if there is any disparity at all, it is evidence of racism. So for example, like the fact that, just like what I said, Black Americans are less likely to own a home, is evidence of racism. But that's not necessarily true. I mean, yeah, our legacy of racism may have contributed to that, but that is hardly the only reason why Black Americans are less likely to own a home. And to say that signifies racism is actually offensive to our real history of racism, and it's almost like saying that the fact that the writing profession is a 75% female profession is an example of sexism against men, which is not true. There's preferences, there's choices that people make. And yeah, maybe there's some structures of society that keep out men from the writing profession, but I'm not going to fixate on that. And the solution is not to fixate on that. The solution should be, let's adopt a standard, and, maybe we should be, depending on your philosophy, maybe we should be encouraging men to go into the writing profession, and maybe we shouldn't. But in the end, if there are disparities that come out of it, that's okay, because people are going to make different choices about their lives. So the fact that an outcome is there does not mean that racism is the structure of society.
So thank you for your presentation. It's stimulating. I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
Your lecture is taking place under the auspices of the Center for Human Flourishing, which Dr. Bradley directs. And I had a question about how you understand corporations. In some ways, it's building on the question posed by the future dentist. Do you think that corporations' overarching responsibility, whether they're publicly held or private, is to maximize profit? Or do you think it's legitimate for corporations to say, we want to promote human flourishing, and the pursuit of profit is a very important means to the end of promoting human flourishing? Because here's where I think your argument might encounter some difficulties. If you believe that corporations are allowed to promote human flourishing, then what I think you need to say is that some of our corporations now, confused about what human flourishing actually consists of. When I say corporations broadly accept the view that they're allowed to promote human flourishing, I mean corporations giving money to charities, like art museums, philanthropic initiatives, community initiatives, volunteer activities, all that. I think that most people who work for corporations and most citizens who see this would say there's nothing wrong with that. And so then the question might be, well, is the only response to that to say, as some scholars have argued, that corporations above all should be concerned with the maximization of profit? So I wanted to ask what your position is on this.
So there's a couple of questions there. I'm going to answer the easier question for me first, which is, okay, well, right now what corporations do is actually have matching services. So if you want to contribute to a charity, a corporation could match it. So if you want to contribute $200 to the Salvation Army or the American Red Cross, Google would also donate $200 or maybe even $400 to the Salvation Army or American Red Cross based on your desire to donate to that. And I think that's fine because it's a blind system. It's basically saying your preference is my preference. I think it's an empowering thing. But I don't know. Would you tolerate a company that said, I'm going to make you donate, or I'm going to take it out of your salary to donate percentage of your salary to the Republican Party?
No, I think we would all agree with what you said earlier. That's corporations going too far.
Right, so that's corporations going too far. That's my position on charitable contributions. I don't think that a corporation should make a decision for you as to the charity that you want to support, whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's, a Christian charity or a Muslim charity or something like that. That's my position. The first question that you asked, which is it a corporation's primary objective to make profit? Maximize profit. My answer is actually yes. So, and I think that this is a good thing. So now we have laws, right? Like you can't make somebody work, 15 hours a day, or you can't do child labor. We already passed laws to, I think, gather some of the worst excesses of that. But here's the, if a corporation does not seek to maximize profit, then my investment in your corporation, my investment is not being protected, is not being held responsible. You're disobeying your responsibility to me, the investor in your corporation. And also, you are disobeying your responsibility to your employees. Because for your employees to have a good job and to get paid on time and to do these kinds of things, a corporation has to make a profit. You signed a contract with your for-profit corporate. This is for for-profits. You signed a contract with your for-profit corporation. The company would take care of your salary and financial needs, and that it's its primary responsibility. And now you're saying, well, a corporation should do these other things before it should consider maximizing profits, that it should have a side constraint of environmental justice or climate change or racial justice. First of all, what does your company's CEO really know about racial justice? Honestly. This guy went to Stanford for an MBA, and did his PhD dissertation in, market theory. What does he really know about racial justice? And now you're entrusting this guy with the responsibility of solving society's problems that people have struggled over for the past 400 years? I don't think so. So, a corporation's fundamental responsibility should be to maximize profits.
Yes.
So, thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome.
I know that for your speech. I think that we all can agree to the idea that it is not a corporation's place to overstep its bounds, while also accepting that every corporation is going to have its own, mission statement. It holds its own values. And there's a fine line between upholding those values and wanting to see them reflected in your employees. and overstepping. I also think that another reason that this is a problematic framework here that you presented is that at that point that you're at the corporation, that's almost too late to try to fix a lot of these problems with an eye toward the meritocracy that you're discussing due to disparities of opportunity prior to that point. So I want to give you the opportunity also to speak kind of to solutions. If it's not being solved by corporate America, first, how should we address efforts to amplify diversity? Sorry.
Okay.
Second, because in my understanding, and I agree with you, merit should be what we look at, right? Not skin color, not gender, not anything else.
Yeah.
But if you have unequal opportunity and someone else has higher merit as a result of different opportunities, would you suggest then that a solution could be to even the playing field at an earlier start rather than relying on corporations to have to go to the point of exceeding their bounds with their missions and values? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I get where you're coming from, and I like what you said, because actually the root form of progressivism, before progressivism became what it is today, like it or not, progressivism's root was equal opportunity, and equal opportunity does not mean equal outcomes, right? Equal opportunity means we're going to give you as best as we can, a playing field where you can compete in society and then let the competition progress as it does. And, that's the root of meritocracy. That's why we have a public education system. We didn't have a public education system until the early 1900s, guys. But that's why we have a public education system, because we have progressives who believed that everybody should be given a fair shot to compete in the economy of knowledge. Doesn't mean everybody's going to utilize their shot as well as everybody else. Speaking of the diversity issues that you raised, diversity is a really hard topic. I wrote a 250-page book, and I only addressed one issue about the diversity angle, which is diversity and meritocracy. And the number one thing you should know is that, yes, sometimes disparities are about lack of opportunity, but sometimes they actually are the result of not taking advantage of the opportunity that you've been given. And that's an issue that I don't think people really want to talk about. But I can give you an example right here in New York City. Asian Americans are the lowest income earners in New York City as a group. People don't know that. We actually have the highest rate of poverty in New York City. Yet, low income Asians in households making less than $40,000 a year score higher on the SAT math than high income Blacks, Hispanics, and whites. I don't know about you, but I don't think that those high income whites and Blacks and Hispanics had less opportunity than these Asian Americans. But there's one thing to have opportunity, and there's another thing to fully take advantage of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.